Alright everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil, and today we're going to talk about the things that I think in 2024 we're going to start needing. I don't want to say changes are coming, but what stuff would I be preparing to do heading into 2024? We're going to talk about it here, so make sure you like, subscribe, comment down below, let me know your thoughts, and of course, we've got to thank the channel members so much for all of their continued support. I cannot express how grateful I am for all of you, and I hope I'm providing you the content that you want to see out of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. So again, thank you to all of you, even if you're only on the council and not yet granted the rank of Master. It is much appreciated. So let's kind of cover a couple of areas that I think I would start to be thinking about as we head into 2024. So the first one has to be in fleets, but in particularly, it's kind of some of these off-meta ships. So think of the Scythe, your Marauder, the TIE Interceptor, the TIE Defender, those kinds of ships, those ships that are key to some of these off-meta counters you're seeing for Leviathan, Profundity, and Executor, I really think they're going to be very, very important in 2024 because I would expect to get another S-tier fleet. I would expect that we get another S-tier fleet, a fleet that's, better than Leviathan, right? And with that, whenever these new fleets get released, the one thing that has always remained constant is how important those off-meta counters are. The players who are able to pull them off, the players who are able to do them, have a significant advantage, particularly because of placing 3 fleets on defense. That right now, you think the 3 S-tier fleets can go on your defense, that you can put Profundity, Executor, and Leviathan on your defensive wall, and that there are players who will one-shot all of them with off-meta stuff. So the state of the game now, in my opinion, is that with those things, with all that stuff said, if you don't have these off-meta ships and your opponents do, it's going to be vastly, vastly more difficult for you to clear them consistently. Like, just think of what if, you drop against their Leviathan because you don't have a solid Marauder, or because you don't have, you're like me and your Plo Koon is, gear 12 or whatever, that we're really going to need to have these things, buttoned up. And I think that a lot of you are going to say, oh, Phil, well, I can't farm Marauder. Like, I don't have the Bad Batch. And I said, but that's exactly where I think we're heading, that they don't release those ships just for fun. They release them with a purpose, and that purpose is to help the off-meta, to give players who have them the advantage of clearing those higher-level ships. So I really think that those are going to be vastly, vastly important heading into 2024. So off-meta fleet's going to be something that I just, I would very much be working on, right? The next one, this kind of has to do with, Bo-Katan, Mandalore coming into the game. But in particular, also just thinking about how they've been adding characters to certain factions, some of the tweaks that's been happening. So one of the big ones is I'd look at the Armorer. The Armorer is a character that I think in 2024 we could see get very important to that Bo-Katan Mandalore team, because think of what Admiral Trench did with Wat Tambor. Admiral Trench made Wat Tambor a key part of his team, taking him away from Sith Eternal, and they're adding Darth Bane to give Sith Eternal a friend. Well, the Armorer has kind of been in that Wat Tambor, spot where she's kind of this character that we use to throw into a team to beat something, right? You use her with Sith Eternal to beat Jedi Master Kenobi, or you use her with Kylo to beat, whoever. I think she's going to be a character that goes with Bo-Katan Mandalore, and it may surprise a lot of players if you don't have her already, or if you're using her with other things. So she is one that I think I'd put on this list of, hey, I'd be maybe thinking about working on this character, but it's characters like her. These ones where they might not particularly have a perfect home yet, or where their uses are kind of all over the place. Capital Games really seems to be giving characters and things a specific use, which is something that was kind of, they're going away from these plug-and-play type characters and creating teams out of everything. And there's a beauty to that in some ways, and there's also something that's lost. Like, I can remember back in the day when you'd use these random teams with this synergy that's just somehow worked and it made sense, So I think they're really moving away from that. Other teams that I think could potentially get a fourth would be Old Republic Jedi. So you have Jedi Knight Revan, Juhani, Bastila, and Jolee. We're missing a 5th Old Republic Jedi character. And with Jedi Knight Cal Kestis now in the game, where he's kind of creating characters, you've got Keller and Beck coming to supplement the Galactic Republic Jedi with Qui-Gon Jinn. I would be very curious if they would add a 5th Old Republic Jedi, whether it could be Satele Shan, which I know all, Satele Shan, which I know all of us would love. Like, Satele would be amazing. that would break the game even more. Like that would go, you release Darth Bane and then you release, Satele. But I think that this is a faction I keep my eye out for, where, we've got some Old Republic characters, but, like Shorty has, his team, right, that they made up with droids. Canderous going with Mandalorians. Then you've got kind of Karth, Mission, T3, Zalbar. You don't have that 5th Old Republic, and then you don't have that 5th Old Republic Jedi either. So I think, as we're continuing to look at these things, you have to look at these areas, and I think Old Republic Jedi could be something that kind of creep into 2024. Remember, they've been really big at taking these factions that have been existing in the game, kind of missing that character, and throwing them in there. So I think this could be one. Sticking with something like that, let's talk Imperial Troopers for a second. So right now in the game, there are 13 Imperial Troopers. Now, the reason that's significant is because, well, obviously it's too short of being able to complete a full Imperial Trooper team. But when Dark Trooper Gideon comes into the game, you're going to be running your OG Gideon, your Death Trooper, Stormtrooper, and Scout Trooper, right? Your Imperial Remnants. When you look at the Imperial Remnant, you kick Dark Trooper out and you run these guys with, Dark Trooper Gideon. That's going to be the team to run. So then you go back to your Imperial Troopers and you're like, okay, that leaves me with Veers, Piet, Dark Trooper, Stark, Range Trooper, Shore, Magma Trooper, and Iden Versio. So you're not, and Snow Trooper, right? Like you're not left with the best teams, obviously, because Moff Gideon being a key member to a lot of us with the Piet team or with the Veers team, So I would argue that we're going to get a 5th, that we're going to get another Imperial Trooper. I'd be curious if this would be one where they have Imperial Remnant synergy as well, maybe like a Purge Trooper, where you allow them to be a good character with the Imperial Remnants, kind of add some flavor there, or just say, hey, they're going to be Imperial Trooper and they're going to go under Iden Versio, because that will really be a detriment to a lot of players if they're not able, like you think, they were like, oh, well, you'll use Dark Trooper Gideon with your Dark Side Mandalorians, and then you'll use, like, I think we're going to miss that other Imperial Trooper. I feel like that could be something that could come into this game because they've been really big on trying to complete teams and not necessarily waste characters. So I'd be on the lookout for that, right? Just thinking outside the box, thinking a little bit ahead, that could be something that I would potentially be looking at. The last faction for me is the Tuskens. So Tuskens is unique. They've kind of had their time in the sun. We've got them a Datacron again. They were, they're still kind of needed in Conquest at times, not quite as prevalent. The big thing with Tuskens that I've always had this feeling about is that there's more that's coming. They said that this would be a faction that was like Inquisitors. And I don't think they've ever quite got to that place where Inquisitors were needed every other week for the Galactic Challenges. And Tuskens never quite got there. They're needed in Conquest, but I don't think they're nearly as necessary as, say, like, Inquisitors have been, right? Where Inquisitors, there's always a purge zone. There's always a kill with Inquisitor units. There's always, something, right, that you need them for. I don't necessarily think Tuskens have ever reached that level. Even though we have the global feat for Tusken Warrior now, there's not like, oh, get momentum, get protection up, call, like anything. Like they've never really hit that place that I feel Inquisitors did. And it always makes me wonder if we're going to get something more for these guys. I've just always had this feeling of what if it's like Cobb Vanth? That, hey, Tuskens at Relic 7 unlock Cobb Vanth on Tatooine, or that, put them somewhere else, right? That I really think that we haven't seen the end of this faction, and it's something that going into 2024, I have a feeling that they could be necessary for stuff because I don't think they've ever really reached that height of where Capital Games has wanted them. So I don't know, maybe that's just me being hopeful that I'd get an excuse to work on them, but I really think that they just have never reached that place that Inquisitors did. And again, also kind of thinking, how many characters did we actually get for the Book of Boba Fett? We didn't get that many characters that are in Book of Boba Fett. You got the Chieftain and you got the Warrior, and then otherwise the only one I can think of is Chrysanthemum. Because if you go back to your bounty hunters, because you're going to say, oh, well, we have Fennec and Boba, but those were released with the Mando Season 2 characters. They were not released with Book of Boba Fett. So I wonder if we could see more characters from the Book of Boba Fett. Would we get a crime lord Boba Fett? Would, something like that, right? I'd be very curious to see how all of that continues to pan out. Because, again, like you think of the way that we use Fennec, that if you're not using her for beating Lord Vader, a lot of players kind of kick her out of the team. So I just, again, I hope you guys kind of see this pattern that I'm looking at teams, I'm looking at characters that right now kind of have this one-off use or that don't really have a full team yet. I think these could be really solid options heading into 2024. So just a couple of things that I'm not necessarily saying you farm all of them, but just things that I'd keep in the back of your head. And again, if you're free to play and you're like, how Phil, none of this really impacts me. This is how I would say you want to be thinking ahead, is that like right now, if I just show you guys what I'm farming. So I'm farming Seer, Saw, Tarful, Trip Zero, and Paz Vizsla. Now, obviously, I don't have nearly as much to farm as everybody else does. But you think I'm farming for 3 different things. I'm farming a character for Aphra, I'm farming characters for Cal Kestis, and I'm farming one for Bo-Katan Mandalore. What I'm trying to do is figure out, like, oh, Phil, why wouldn't you do refreshes or this or that? I'm trying to give myself the ability that if I need to pivot to something, I can do it. So I think as soon as I get Seer, I'm going to start working on Cal Kestis. I want to build the unaligned Force user team, but I'm going to kind of continue to bide my time a little bit, see how impactful the Bo-Katan is, see where I need to be for that, because as we get into this year and the more that I've seen from 2023, what I've learned from 2023 is that these characters, as soon as they're released, are really, really good. And then after that point in time, you think once Leia's Datacron goes away, once Malicos' Datacron goes away, that's when I feel we'll really get a good picture for what their impact in this game will be. And so I want to be in that position that if like the Malicos team is really good, even without the Datacron, boom, I'm going to be, working on them like crazy. Otherwise, maybe I just go for Dr. Aphra, or I'm going to go for Bo-Katan Mandalore. That I think we really need to see how that's going to transition. And so if I can put myself in the best position possible to have things to build from, I'll be a lot happier with myself. So that's kind of the things that I'm just thinking about as we go into 2024, guys. And I think for all of you, you're like, oh, Phil, well, why didn't you tell me to work on GLs? This is not the farming guide. These are just things that I think we could be getting in 2024 as I look at what's in the roster now, the things we got in 2023, and how we continue to move forward. So let me know your thoughts. Like, subscribe, comment down below. I love all of you. May the Force be with you, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.